everyone, I am here with a story, a true story, where miracles happen, true stories of heavenly encounters. A friend that lives here in our building let me borrow this book. I'm trying to get as many read as possible to get through it so I can give it back to her. She wants this one back when I'm done. Alright, so as you know, there's either a Bible verse or a quote or something before each story. And this one says, "The farther we go along the path of God, the more angels we shall encounter." And that is by A Handbook of Angels by Dr. H.C. Mollenborough. Okay, so let's read Wonder at Wrigley Field. As Kenneth and Anita Stink reared their 6 children, it became obvious that Anita was the spiritual one in the family. I had never been more than a Sunday Christian, with just a surface relationship with God, Kenneth says, and he saw no reason to change. But Anita prayed frequently that God would reveal himself more deeply to her husband. One afternoon, Kenneth and Anita took the family to Wrigley Field to watch the Chicago Cubs play the Cincinnati Reds. The Stinks attended games often and considered themselves faithful bleacher bums, part of the crowd that overlooks the outfield. Bleacher seats were cheap and families could bring picnics, and there was always the chance a bum might catch a home run ball. Today the Stinks sat in the right field bleachers with 4-year-old Janet and youngest directly in front of Kenneth. Janet was frail and small, but she enjoyed baseball, Kenneth says. Everyone was relaxed and upbeat. Suddenly in his mind, Kenneth heard the words, "Janet is going to be hit in the temple with a fly ball. If you don't take action, she'll be seriously injured or killed." Kenneth sat absolutely still, astounded. The message was so firm, so compelling, that he never thought to doubt the truth of it. "It sounds strange, but I was convinced it was going to happen," he said. How could he prepare? He could take Janet away, but the voice hadn't told him when the ball would come. Did it make sense to confine himself and his daughter in the car, or to walk her around for the next several hours? And the other kids would be inconsolable if he insisted they go home now, especially on such flimsy-sounding evidence. But to Kenneth, the command was anything but frivolous. What if he rehearsed for a fly ball? Slowly, Kenneth slid his forearm in front of Janet's head. Yes, his arm was big enough to shield her, but could he react fast enough? For the next several minutes, Kenneth drilled himself, shoving his arm directly in front of Janet, then releasing it, then shoving it again. Nearby fans began to notice his movements. Several looked at him strangely, perhaps wondering if he had developed some sort of tic. Janet was perplexed too. "What are you doing, Daddy?" she asked once. "I can't see." The crack of Pete Rose's bat was almost anticlimactic when it came just a few minutes later. The long line ball shot across the length of Wrigley Field like an arrow, picking up speed as it flew over the wall right toward Janet's head. And in that split second, Kenneth knew just what to do. Throwing his left arm across his daughter's forehead, just as he'd practiced, he used his right hand to shield his own face. The ball struck his arm with a terrible force, bounced on and off Anita, then disappeared into a pile of people. Kenneth looked at his left arm. It was already starting to swell, but Janet was safe, her little face still whole and perfect. Kenneth stayed up late that night, His arm throbbed, but it wasn't the pain that kept him awake. What had happened today? Had he really received a message from Janet's guardian angel or his? Or had it simply been a father's intuition? Then Kenneth remembered another episode a few years earlier. In a frightening dream, he had seen his toddler son, Kenny, sliding down a muddy embankment, while he, Kenneth, grabbed the child with one hand and held on to a tree with the other. "Kenny is going to drown unless you save him," a voice told him in the dream. Kenneth had awakened in alarm, but later dismissed his fears. The day after the dream, however, he had taken the five older children out for a ride. He drove rather aimlessly until he got to a nature area where I used to play as a kid, he recalls. We walked along the trail, and as we turned a corner, there was a river with a dam just ahead. "Daddy, look!" Kenny ran toward the water, and Kenneth ran after him. Rivers were no place for impulsive tots. But Kenny began to slide down a muddy incline, right toward the whirling vortex of the dam. "Look out!" Kenneth shouted, leaning forward to grasp the little boy. I had him with one hand and was reaching for a tree to steady myself when all of a sudden I realized that the scene was right out of my dream, Kenneth says. I had been there just when I needed to be to keep Kenny from falling and being pulled under the water. God must be calling him closer. What more proof did Kenneth need? Today, Kenneth's relationship with God is a priority, and he's glad he has had angels in his life, both the heavenly and earthly varieties, who never lost faith in him. Amen. Amen. Just like Jesus never will either. God will do that. I've heard other cases and seen other true cases on TV where God has people dream stuff that's going to happen. And the next day or whatever, it plays out just that way. And they're saved from what would have happened to them because of that dream that God put in their head. So they would be all right. This ain't the first time I heard of something like that happening to somebody. But I hope you guys enjoyed that true story, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. Good night, guys.